Good morning. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, is Tatiana Bilbao. As BJ announced, architecture is always been since the beginning an important part of our idea of the talks. We never called them Engadin architecture talks, although we could perhaps, because we have more and more architects, but we could call them Engadin Arts talks, and before the division of the discipline, architecture was considered the place where the arts meet. So it is, from the start, it's a space of communication and exchange. There's many connections that one can draw from architecture to listening. There's the idea that architecture is something like frozen music. Architecture has to do with resonance, with sounds coming back. But all this is just an introduction. We're very happy that Tatiana Bilbao could come here. She's based in Mexico City, where you founded your office in 2004. And since then, you've been an eminent voice in the various fields of architecture, architecture exhibitions, realized projects, discourse. Welcome, Tatiana Bilbao.
Thank you. If Jeppe was nervous, then I'm more nervous after your presentation. It's very hard to open a festival, but then it's very difficult to continue with a great talk like it was before. Thank you. So we can start. And yeah, first of all, I would like to thank profoundly the curators and the organizers of these talks. I think it's incredibly even more important to do them as the world we are living in is what it is. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Can we start the video? I grew up in the center of Mexico City. During my childhood, the city duplicated its population. So I saw the density increasing in my neighborhood, definitely. But at some point also, when in 1985, a very big earthquake hit the city, I saw my neighborhood decreasing in density. Those who were affected, the ones who were nervous, or the rich left the neighborhood. We were neither, so we stayed. I saw then my neighborhood really in decay, and then I saw it again transformed by the commercial expression of offices coming to the empty spaces that people left after the earthquake. I then decided to study architecture. For me, it was definitely. But I came to school possibly at the worst moment of the recent history of architecture. It was the moment where my professors were really disguising the things that were happening at the moment, so the horrors of postmodernism. And they were embracing the new idea of us having to live with the software and having to think that in the future our lives were going to be directed and designed by software. So I was taught to do blobs and blebs, and really I was I was taught to understand the new ways of representing what was happening, which was then neoliberalism. My obvious response after my obsession of how to come into architecture was to escape from that. And I started working at the Minister of Urban Planning and Housing. Sorry, I'm gonna take a bit of water. And after understanding that for me there was little to do because bureaucracy came and eat everything, I decided that I had to go out and pursue my own practice to understand how to design and design and understand how to produce spaces for public use, but also for private necessities. My first commissions were along those public spaces. I started doing a botanical garden or a pavilion for exhibitions, but I was still obsessed on how people lived, first immediately in their intimate way of living, and then how those stages allowed to people to start relating it to a more broader community and to a larger one, and to finally the public space. So I was always thinking on domestic spaces. The first domestic space, or one of the first domestic spaces that I was able to design was this house. It was a house in a lake. And Viviana came to our office with lots of dreams. He described her dreams, and I was zooming in my mind, and it zoomed about 300 square meters. But her budget was more or less what now it would be 100,000 Swiss francs. So I thought, well, she needed to increase her money in double or decrease her dreams in half. Since nothing of that was happening, I thought that we might just take the challenge. And we did. We took it, and we designed a house with that budget, with that amount of space. Obviously, we had to become intrinsically together to do it. I needed to understand her dreams. I became obsessed with the idea of becoming her during the process of design. Upon the impossibility, I then was thinking that I needed to become the translator of her dreams and allowing her to really express what she wanted in terms of, and spatially. It was a whole process of really interacting with her, and at the end I felt I was becoming her. I knew all her obsessions, like things like, what happens if the boyfriend of my daughter is a left-handed? What the bathroom then will not work. These were the kinds of obsessions we passed by. It was a process of 3 years, maybe 4 years, and it was very interesting how I really thought I knew her. I knew her completely, and I understood, well, at least from the millions of definitions of domesticity, I know one, Viviana's. I really thought always that each of us have a way of living that it's very different from the other. Therefore, being an architect and trying to represent that into a space is almost impossible. And then all of a sudden, Viviana asked us to design her house in the city, a house that would be used for her everyday life. And I thought, perfect, we know everything. When do we start working? Viviana, I know all your obsessions. Yeah, the left-handed boyfriend never appeared. Now Mariana's gonna get married. Her husband is right-handed, okay. Then what is the design? Perfect, no problems. And I started designing, and all of a sudden another Viviana appeared. And I was very, very confused. I was like, come on, Viviana, I know you. We know each other. I know your obsessions. I know your decisions. I know the way you like to live. But I understood then that it's not only that each of us has our own definition of living, but that each of us, according to our own present situation and our own very desires of the moment, we have a different definition of domesticity. So then I started to become really interested in understanding how was then that we were able to, as a society and as our architects, pursue the idea of equality and democracy within design, but at the end, we ended up with generous buildings, with generic buildings, sorry. Buenos días. Oigan, vamos a vestirnos primero, ¿no? Gracias, María.
Hola, señora, buenos días. ¿Le hago su licuado?
We then were commissioned to design 2 houses in a one complex. It's a complex of a family. Every house belonged to a member of the family. And we first designed this house, which was for a family of 7 members. At the moment I was designing, there were 3, but they were planning on being more. They ended up being 7. And their obsession was to understand how to live a more horizontal way. They are from a background of a family that is extremely hierarchical, that is extremely obsessive with the generations and the organization through the hierarchy and the social position you have. So they were really obsessed, these ones, this young part of the family, to have a space that would be working, more horizontal, more to promote a more horizontal relationship with the family, not the understanding of the public space of the adults in the bottom and the children's space in the top, and not the understanding of the hierarchy about the parents and the children. But when I arrived, the site was like a hill. How to design then a hill, a horizontal space within a hill. At the end, we ended up working with a structure that unfolds on the terrain and that follows the site. In the same compound, we were able to design another house, but this, in this case, was a weekend house, and it was for a cousin of Rodrigo. Vanessa was the client, and Vanessa was needing a house, a place to retreat, a place to be with her family, without her family. In the same way, it's in the middle of the forest, and she decided she wanted a house that it would be really in touch of nature, but that no mosquitoes would hit her. That was a challenge, and it's beautiful to design houses like that, with generous budgets, with amazing clients, with people that challenge your mind. But what is it when you have to design also for those who don't have those opportunities? We designed a pilgrimage route in Jalisco, and this is one of the kitchens that gives services for the people. I started then to think, what is it if we really understand the way of organizing ourselves in the individual, that send the next level of the collective, and then the next level of society? There's a lot of people that do it. In this case, sharing a kitchen with the whole pilgrimage route, with all the people that are around this pilgrimage, is a normal act. It's a normal act for all those villagers that live there, that share their kitchens, their living rooms, their spaces with the others. This is the way they live. How can we understand that the individual life, the domestic, the most intimate way of living, would allow us the possibility of understanding how to relate to the society, how to relate with the others? Then it was when I was obsessed with understanding how we could design, how can architecture become that platform for everybody to design their own lives, and instead of us imposing a life. I mean, I think that the ideals of the 20th century of really obsessive way of designing a functional space that would really have all the functions you need for living, generalizing the idea of living, it's very dangerous, no? It's supposed that we all need a kitchen. We all need a room that is labeled sleeping room. We all need a living space that is labeled living space. Put a couch here. No? We all need a bathroom. Well, not. You would be surprised that not all of us live the same, and we don't all of us need that. So we were trying to understand that, to promote an architecture that would be open, that had open-enders. Then we designed houses that are able to be built with 8,000 francs, and be self-constructed, but that also they're not directed. This space can become a kitchen, or can become a room, or can become the living space of the family. Or it can be expanded and double in size and become another thing. It is very difficult to think how to design for the 7 billion people that are living and that they are different. So how can architecture become just a medium, and we don't become those impositors of a life of anyone, no? I think in Mexico, housing is not only a human right, it's a constitutional right. So every government has the mandate of doing houses. In the last 20 years, 11 million boxes were built and sold as houses for people in need. And for me, it became really urgent to understand how to achieve those goals of the 20th century, have equality and democracy for all, but also how to integrate those possibilities of representation in a space. We are the space we have. The space that surrounds us is the second most important necessity a human being has. The first necessity is to eat and be healthy. The second one is we need a refugee. We have proved that caves are not for us. We have proved that we need spaces that inspire our lives. Vanessa, the client of the house we did in the compound, in the family compound that I explained you, called me a year after we finished the house and told me, Tatiana, you might not know this story, although as I said, I have become obsessive to understanding the people that we built in completely. But my best friend is Pater Kilian. He's a Cistercian monk living in Heiligenkreuz in a monastery outside Vienna, and he wants to talk to you because he had followed the construction of my house. Of course, I thought, yeah, please give him my contact. Pater Kilian called me. We were in the phone for 3 hours, and he said, when can you come? We really are interested that you can help us with our space. I arrived to Heiligenkreuz in January of 2017, and I started to understand then the life of this monastery, of this community. Obviously, my first introduction to it was to think how a Cistercian monk exists in the 21st century. And to my first reaction, obviously, my first, second, third, and a lot to follow, were to think rationally, were to think on my life reflected on them, how a monk then lives within my life in mind. Rationalizing a way of living that they chose after a rule of pursuing spirituality. It's impossible to understand for us, I've come to realize. The life they live is a life devoted to a spiritual process of the understanding of God, of the immersion with God, and the intimacy with God. It's really a concept that is very hard to understand, especially for me. I was brought in a Catholic country with a Catholic grandmother that baptized me, but with two revolutionary parents. So definitely my Catholicism ended when my grandmother unfortunately died, and I was very young. I was then very, very, I would not say skeptical, but I was coming from these, from the obsessions of the understanding of designing a space that would have all these necessities, these realities, these functionalities. And all of a sudden, I'm there in a life that all of these things doesn't matter. All of these things are superfluous and are unneeded. What is then needed in a monastery? The first thing I understood when I really got immersed in the idea of a Cistercian life is how the body becomes the first representation of that spiritual life. And the first external representation of that is the rope. The second then is the cell. The cell and the aggregation of cells becomes the community. The community in full that allows this monastery to exist. If this community is not balanced enough, the monastery ceases to exist. I realized that this Cistercian monastery in Heiligenkreuz has an incredible community that really, the balance between that individual life and that communal life is what gives this vitality. The understanding of that made me thought of our lives. What is it that we need then for a space? What is it the first representation that we need to have to achieve that individual life that would let us then to become that social entity that we are? I think there are a lot of things we can learn from a monastery. But certainly, after listening to Pater Kilian, what silence means for him, I definitely changed my obsessions. Silence is a precious and fragile presence, the purest form and aim of love, where all is clear, is in this place beyond words that one can experience the highest intimacy. I told you a lot about all my obsessions. I have understand that, that if space is about memory, that if space is constructed through memory and the mind that transforms it, aiming for the highest understanding of intimacy should be my next obsession on how to design. Then I would say that I really liked the challenge of being here because it made me think that design is about thinking of silence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for this beautiful presentation. I particularly liked the unexpected way that we see the beautiful images by Ivan Ban as stills, but then there is the sound continuing also while you are speaking. I think this opens a dimension which allows to enter your spaces in a completely different way. So thanks a lot for the presentation. We have a moment to answer questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. As many of us would agree that our future is community-based, and if we are not talking about monastery and we look into the history of communal architecture, it failed so many times. If you think about Soviet architecture, where there were a lot of buildings for communities which are larger than one family, with one kitchen or the bedroom for all of the children in the house, it just didn't work. So what do you think, is there any future for community buildings, and if yes, what would be the approach?
Yeah, well, that is the question of the $1 million, but I think that this is something that I've been thinking completely in parallel with this monastery. So the old fathers understood that it was impossible for them to live by themselves, no? So hermits needed to become a community, and this is why monasteries started to exist, amid the fact that we humans are not self-sustainable, that they needed a community in order to be able to survive. So knowing this and understanding this, they created these types of communities that have this balance of all the required moments of intimacy with the exact exposure towards those moments of community and the possibility for them then to exist. So I think there's a lot to learn from monasteries. I think that this is why they exist in the same form since the moment they were created. I think also what I have seen is that the monastery is the quintessential form where form follows type, where the quintessential type that form follows a function, no? And the day works specifically for that, for encouraging the moments of silence and for encouraging the moments of community. And I think that we have lost that possibility of understanding what is the balance. I still yet don't know, and I still, obviously, we are not aiming for a spiritual life, so we cannot take the monastery in a literal way, no? But I do believe that there is a staging of possible relationships that we're missing. So in cities, what we're doing is more and more we're really understanding how to ban more like the possibility of this creation of communities by creating individual spaces for families or small families or little individuals, and then expose you to the complete collective. No? There is this set of stages that I think is missing on really the creating of these layers of relationship as the monks have, no? The body, the robe, the cell, the cloister, the community, and then the exterior. I don't know, maybe there's a clue to work on.
Thomas.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Did I understand you correctly that in the beginning of your talk, we heard a lot about the obsessions of your clients, and you wanted to learn them and understand them, but then there was a sudden shift with the monastery, and there are not so many obsessions, huh? It's like two totally separate worlds, huh? And my question now is, what is your view on these obsessions? Huh? Do you want to change society? Do you want to minimize the obsessions or the wishes or the dreams and bring us closer to the monastery life? What is your view in the background of your head?
Well, I have understood that I'm innocent, but not that much, so I have understood that I cannot change anything. Just do small to apport little things to it. But what I wanted to express with these is exactly that before I started to work for the monks, I really had a lot of obsessions of becoming the other, of understanding how to create architecture as a platform, of many, many other things. I think that right now understanding the purest and most important simplicity of the way of understanding one soul's life would be my only obsession in the future after working in the monastery. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Hello. I'm obsessed with Louis Kahn, so your presentation reminds me of Louis Kahn because behind there's so much humanity. Actually, Louis Kahn, also, you must have read book Silence and the Light. So I watched this film like Tiger City, you know, the project he spent years working on. I want to go back to what Thomas said. My understanding to that question is behind through space, through design, you seems like trying to, it's like an offering. Whether it's from beginning it's personal, later I could feel your obsession with the monks. We cannot transform the world into a monastery, but in some way, every time when I go to different religious places, because all these places is full of people's goodwill, good heart. When you enter these spaces, immediately you feel everything become sacred, you become better. But why different religion, when they get out of their sacred space, is different. So in a way, probably, yes, we have to design the whole world with that intention. Like, I don't know if I make clear.
Well, I do think that there is a sense of the understanding of how we can allow everybody to live their own life, creating their own spaces around them to search for that, no? And yeah, there is an impossibility because on the other hand, we are the ones, or architects, we are the one, or not only architects, but there is someone else doing that for you, no? So how can we promote both the interaction of that? I don't have an answer. It's an ongoing topic in my life.
Yeah.
Hi. You said that design is thinking that design is thinking of silence. That I found very, very inspiring. And I wanted to know, according to you, what are the great examples in modernity in architecture that took into account that dimension?
Well, I think it's very hard because I think I at least interpreted in my mind very different and in modern times where. There was like the third meeting with the monks. We were recalling which were those monasteries built recently. And we were describing a lot of them, and Pater Kilian was talking about one specifically, and he was saying, it was about Novidur, and which is one of the monasteries that it's Trappist, it's not Cistercian, but they come from the same root, so then the same order at the end. And Pater Kilian said, you know, that monastery is so perfect that makes the soul feel imperfect. We need a place where our soul is comfortable. So, easy, no? Now we have an easy task to design this place.
Everything clear. I like the conclusion. We need a place where the soul is comfortable. I also take with me that you listen to the clients. This is an unusual approach for architecture, which generally believes that architecture knows how life should be seen. I take this with me, this listening to the clients very much into the break, which we will now have. There's a coffee break. And we meet at 12, exactly at 12, here again to listen to Emeka Okpo's presentation. Please be back here at 12. And once again, big applause for Tatiana. Thanks.